As technology continues to develop and medication improves, the life expectancy rate of humans is supposed to continue to increase over the years. This increase shows that the human race is evolving and that we are learning to solve a multitude of issues to allow people to ultimately live longer lives. A century ago, the life expectancy rate was only like an average of 39 years, and today it resides at about 70.5 years. While it's increased a great amount since then, in recent years, the United States has come across an issue which has led this life expectancy rate to decrease. Starting in 2015, the life expectancy rate dropped for the first time in decades, and it went from 78.9 years to 78.7 years. And one of the main factors that caused this drop was the extremely high rates of death by opioid overdose. The CDC explains that there have been three different waves to the increasing amount of opioid deaths. And let me share my screen. Okay, so as you can see here, the first wave started in the 90s, and that is when like opioid prescribing started to increase. And since 1999, the little purple line at the bottom, it has been increasing since then. And the second wave is like the little orange line, and you can see in 2010, it skyrockets because this is when people started turning to heroin after initially becoming addicted to the opioids in the first place. And heroin's just cheaper to obtain, and it started turning to heroin. And then the third wave happened in about 2013, the last like navy line, where people who then started turning to illegal fentanyl and other things like that to fulfill their cravings. And as of 2018, synthetic opioid deaths were still increasing. So addiction to opioids became a major issue in the 90s when the number of deaths by overdose skyrocketed. And the number of deaths related to this issue had been increasing since the beginning of the century. And without finding a solution to this, the death toll will continue to rise. More than 750,000 people have died since the start of this crisis. And National Drug Abuse claims that to this day, about 128 Americans die every day because of an opioid-related drug overdose. This crisis is taking lives every day, and it is extremely concerning since most of these deaths are unintentional and of relatively young people. And though many young people have been affected, this issue really can affect anyone who becomes involved with these drugs, such as patients who are being prescribed them or people who are buying them off the streets legally. And it's about time that there is a solution found to this. And throughout this presentation, we're going to cover different statistics and main reasons for this whole crisis in the first place, and maybe some solutions that could help fix it a little bit. And so now I'm going to turn to Michael, and he's going to give some more statistics about this crisis in general.
Now let's talk about the statistics of the opioid crisis. As we know, the United States has been having a growing opioid problem over the last couple of decades. Opioid use is really a phenomenon in the West, especially in America, as 80% of the opioid consumption is done in the United States. According to CNBC, there was 300 million opioid pill prescriptions at a market value of $24 billion of legal opioids sold in the United States. Opioid prescription pills are one of the most abused in the nation, with 9.7 million people abusing prescription pills a year, compared to 700,000 people that abuse heroin. That's 3.1 million people abuse it a month, and 103,000 people abuse it a day. According to drugabuse.org, 62% of those people that said they abused it a year started off taking them for pain, which is their valid reason for being prescribed. And 80% of people that abused heroin said they started off by taking prescription opioids and transitioned to heroin. And the most common reason people transition to heroin is because it is a cheaper option than prescription pills. And opioids are also one of the most lethal drugs in America, even if others are used more, as the Department of Health says that 2 out of 3 overdose deaths are related to opioids, and there are 50,000 deaths a year. The rate of overdose deaths has been increasing. Since 1999, the rate of death from overdose has increased by 519% in that time span. The most affected demographic of people as of now is the Native Americans, who are abusing it at a rate of 5.4%. Other groups to look at are teenagers are abusing it at a rate of 2.3%. And as You get to college, people with some college are abusing it at almost double that, at 4%. And then the highest of any group is the unemployed. The unemployed is abusing it at 7% rate. And there are other health issues that are being contributed to the opioid crisis other than just overdoses and addiction. Those would be, there are 2.4 million cases of hepatitis C that are contributed to it, and 1 million cases of HIV, which is contributed to it. And they are contributed due to the injection of drugs, which is the common way of taking opioids. There are also economic problems with the opioid crisis to not only the people abusing them, obviously, but also to the American government. And it is estimated that the opioid crisis costs the American government $78 billion a year in healthcare and benefit costs. And according to NPR, this is only been getting worse over the last year during the pandemic, or up to through 2020, not including the beginning part of 2021. There is no data on that. But so the overdose rates were up to 90,000 that year, driven by the lacing of drugs with fentanyl, which is a synthetic opioid. And synthetic opioids overdoses were up 55%. And a doctor that they interviewed stated that it was rather rare to see an overdose due to just cocaine or meth, but rather that those drugs were being laced with fentanyl, and that was leading to the increase in overdoses with those drugs. So clearly the opioid crisis has only been getting worse as time goes on, and now Jolie will tell you about some of the causes.
Drug addiction, which is also referred to as substance abuse disorder, is a disease that impacts a person's both behavior and brain, leading to an inability to control the use of legal or illegal drug medication. There are various factors that contribute to addiction and can vary considerably from person to person. To begin, genetics greatly affects a person's likelihood of being addicted, even if someone in your family has been addicted to either drugs or alcohol in the past. That does not necessarily mean you will become addicted as well. However, because your family member was an addict, you will have a greater chance to become addicted if you decide to use drugs. Statistics indicate that along with other factors, genetics may contribute 40 to 60% to the risk of addiction. Another factor is the stage of development. Lots of research has indicated that the earlier someone utilizes drugs, the more likely they will start an addiction when they are older. One of the biggest reasons is because brain development is very important during the teenage years. The consequences of using drugs during these years can enable someone to become much more vulnerable to addiction as they grow up. According to the National Institute on Alcohol Abuse and Alcoholism, adults between the ages of 18 and 24 are most likely to have both alcohol use disorders and other drug addictions. Next, gender also affects one's possibilities of having a drug addiction, even though there are some differences between the impact of drugs on men versus women's bodies. Men are actually more likely to use marijuana and alcohol, while women are more likely to use and become addicted to drugs that lower anxiety. In general, men are statistically more likely to use and abuse drugs more than women, but this contrast has been changing in recent years. In addition, studies have demonstrated that multiple ethnic groups process drugs at different rates, meaning some groups are more sensitive to specific drugs than others. Even so, research displays that there is greater utilization of drugs by white Americans versus African Americans or Hispanics. Also, if parents are heavily involved with their child's life and provide structure, there is less of a chance that the child will use or abuse drugs. On the other hand, if the household is unsteady or the parents are addicts themselves, then the child will be more likely to use or abuse drugs. Mental illness plays a factor too. Depending on the type of illness, drugs can give a sense of happiness or well-being. Plus, a variety of mental illnesses will affect the same parts of the brain as drugs, therefore increasing the potential for abuse. Furthermore, the more available drugs are for a person, no matter where they're getting it from, this factor will regulate whether someone will try drugs. Also, an influence of friends can lead someone to have the desire to use and abuse drugs. If someone is encouraging the use of drugs, it may be hard to restrain from trying them too. Next, a suggestion that a teenager may be using drugs is poor academic work or practically failing school. Lastly, stress is another factor that may lead to drug addiction. Stress can come in many different ways and can take on different forms of abuse, such as sexual, physical, or psychological. Regardless, people who experience types of stress may be more likely to use drugs. Specific to opioid addiction, this drug is most addictive when you take them using other methods than what was prescribed, such as crushing the pills so that they can be injected or snorted. It is also more dangerous if you take the pills that have a long or extended formulation. Quickly delivering all the medicine to your body can cause an accidental overdose. Taking more than your prescribed dose of medication also increases your risk of addiction. In addition, the length of time you use prescribed opioids can play a role. Research suggests that taking opioid drugs for more than a few days increases your risk of long-term use, leading to addiction. Also, other significant factors that can result in opioid addiction include poverty, history of criminal activity or legal problems, heavy tobacco use, or severe depression. Next, Wenyu will discuss both the treatment and prevention of drugs.
The best way to prevent the drug crisis from being more serious is simply don't take drugs yourself and prevent those who you care from taking drugs. One of the reasons people use drugs is pressure. There are always times in our life that's extremely difficult and we need ways to relieve that pain. And some people may choose drugs as their option, a dangerous option. Repeated drug use can lead to brain changes that challenge an addicted person's self-control and interfere with their ability to resist the intense urges to take drugs. If you are unable to stop, there will be changes in mood, appetite, and sleep. Those symptoms can lead you to be more engaged in risky behaviors, which may result in crimes or even death. Education on dangers of drugs is an important step in preventing drug addiction. Instead of taking drugs, there are many other methods to manage the stress. Working out regularly is one of the best ways to relax your body and your mind, relieving that stress. Plus, exercise will improve your mood and your body. The healthier the body, usually the better condition the mental health. One other method is to manage your time. Stress and pressure can increase because there are too many tasks that are hard for you at once. So, the time management may help. For example, you can make a list of all your tasks and activities for the day or week, and then rate these tasks by how important and urgent they are. And amazingly, you'll find out there are not that many tasks as you thought. If you know you are able to focus on a project for 3 hours, break up your work into 1-hour blocks over 3 days. It will be easier to face an unpleasant project if your time is brief. However, prevention itself isn't enough. For those who are currently suffering from drug addiction, remember the best treatment is seeking help from psychologists. Treatment varies depending on the type of drug and characteristic of the patient. And here I'll introduce some treatment approaches that are proven successfully. Behavioral counseling is one of the common approaches that can be used with other treatment to help the patient with the drug addiction. It can modify the patient's attitude and behavior related to drug use, increase their healthy life skills, and help them to persist with other forms of treatment, such as medication. Medications are often an important part of treatment. It can suppress the withdrawal symptoms. Patients also use medication to help reestablish normal brain functions and decrease the cravings. Usually, there can be some concurrent conditions present with drug addiction. So, there are also other medications available to treat those possible mental health conditions, such as depression or anxiety, that may be contributing to the person's addiction. Combating drug addiction is hard, It's not that hard as some people may think. According to the National Survey on Drug Use and Health, 19.7 million of Americans battled a substance use disorder in 2017. For those who are stressing out with drug addiction, remember you are not alone. Next, Maya will lead us to a video about drug addiction.
This is Hugh. This is my son. He started on drugs when he was 16, and I can't tell you how much I hated it. I chased Hugh and his friends out of the house when I caught them smoking pot. But I was afraid to get too tough. Afraid that Hugh would shut me out, I would lose my relationship with my son. Drugs controlled his life. Drugs robbed him of his ability to love. Drugs killed his conscience. When his life became filled with horrifying hallucinations, he ended his life. Get between your kids and drugs any way you can if you want to save the kid's life.
As we just saw in the commercial, Carol O'Connor's son took his life because he thought he wouldn't be able to beat his drug addiction. Being an addict not only affects you, but your family, friends, and others who are close to you. Those who witness a family member struggling with addiction are highly likely to suffer from emotional, financial, legal, and medical damage. Yelling and consequences become normal as a parent tries to punish their son or daughter for abusing drugs. Slowly, there becomes less trust and families begin to divide. This can lead to ending of marriages and other detrimental family problems that do not help the child with their substance problems. The Addiction Center stated that at least 19% of individuals between the ages of 12 and 20 years old drink regularly. College students make up one of the largest groups of drug users nationwide. Teens who struggle with substance abuse problems before college are likely to continue these issues as they move away from home and start partying more often. Being a freshman on campus can be overwhelming, and a lot of young adults turn to alcohol and drugs to help cope with this anxiety. While telling yourself that drinking 2 nights a week is okay, this becomes routine, and eventually, a lot of individuals become addicted and struggle to function without some sort of drug to take the pressure off. This may not necessarily be heroin, Oxycontin, or other strong opiates. Students can take Adderall and other prescribed medications to help study and maintain focus. While this may seem less severe, it's just as easy to get addicted to. Not only this, but college campuses found that the high number of sexual assault, property damage, and aggression are directly linked to alcohol abuse. Some solutions to combating addiction are to exercise daily and get organized with schoolwork and extracurriculars to relieve stress and seek help from a psychologist. Signs of drug addiction include mood swings, creating conflict and irritability, and lowered inhibitions. If you are struggling or know someone who's struggling, please call the Substance Abuse and Mental Health Service Administration hotline at 1-800-662-HELP. Please help save a life.